The children seem to be specifically hit by quadcopters, which are drones that have firepower capability, and lots of them were sort of shot in the back, in the head, in the upper torso.
But these are the intentional targeting of children, and they're quadcopters, so they're following.
So they're operated by somebody that's watching what they're doing, so I assume that they are.
Welcome to Reframe, where we seek new conversations and perspectives. I'm Fatima Bhutto, and in this series we'll be discussing one of the biggest stories of our time, the war in Gaza and how international doctors are responding to it. My guest this week is British plastic and reconstructive surgeon, Dr. Victoria Rose. Dr. Rose has had first-hand experience observing the destruction of the healthcare system by Israeli forces, and especially its devastating impact on children. Thank you so much for joining us today, Victoria. Your work is beyond admirable, and watching you speak and seeing what you've done is really so moving. You are a British NHS doctor, but you have no family ties to Gaza. You didn't grow up there, you don't really have any direct connections. What was it that made you pack your bags and go out there?
I first went to Gaza in 2019, I think, or it could be 18, and I was shamed into going by my colleagues. I work at King's College Major Trauma Centre, and two of my colleagues were very influential in a charity called Ideals. They were both orthopaedic surgeons. And Ideals is a charity that offers sort of aid and support to sort of international disasters and war zones. And they had picked Gaza in 2009 and had done some trauma courses there. Initially, I didn't get involved. As time went on, I could see what they were doing, and I went and I did 2 missions. And as soon as I got there, I realised that the problem was that there are no plastic surgeons in Gaza, or no trained plastic surgeons in Gaza. So there are general surgeons that have developed some plastic surgery skills. So there's a very good burn surgeon, but he trained through general surgery. But there's nobody that could do any plastic surgery problem. And I started in 2019 looking for somebody that we could train. Ahmed Mokkalalati, who is a plastic surgeon from Gaza, and he said, I want to learn how to do trauma. And he worked with me for 2 years. He did the first cleft lip and palate repair by a Gazan surgeon. He did a breast reconstruction case. And so every sort of month or every other week, I was getting these photos of the amazing stuff that he was doing, and I was just so proud of him. And then in October, the pictures changed, and he was sending me very different footage. Yeah. And he sent me a picture, I remember this very well, on the 31st of October, and it was a 7-year-old, and he said, I don't know what to do. I think I'm going to have to amputate. What do you all think I should do? And at that point, I sort of said, I think we need to go and help him.
And the first time you went, because you went twice since October the 7th, the first time you were in Gaza, what was your role? What were you doing on a daily basis in the hospitals?
We'd been given emergency medical team status by the Ministry of Health for the missions, and we put a plan together to say that our aim would be to work with our colleagues in Gaza and to take as much medical equipment with us as we could. So that was my agenda, but I operated 24/7 for 2.5 weeks.
Can you describe what the atmosphere of working under those conditions, under siege, under attack, what that was like?
I don't think I really thought very much about where I was and what was happening outside the hospital walls, because there was just so much to do. It was just relentless, constant people to see, constant wounds that needed debriding. you never got on top of it. Every time I finished a case, somebody would show me something else, and it was just all absorbing, and all you kept thinking is, right, I've got to do this, and then we're going to do that, and then this chap needs to come back to theatre, and it just kept going, and you just didn't really stop.
And you've said, Victoria, that close to 90% of those you operated on in Gaza were children. UNICEF has called Gaza the world's most dangerous place to be a child. From what you saw, why would UNICEF say that?
I think that as time went on, we saw more and more children, and certainly when I went back in the August, we were at Nasser for a month, and I operated again every day, and most of my lists were just children.
What was it? Burns? Was it amputations?
It's in an explosion, when a blast goes off, everything around you gets weaponised, so all the masonry and bits of car sort of get whipped up in that energy, and then they hit a civilian at quite a high velocity, and that will penetrate the skin, and it will either break the bone underneath, or it will penetrate the chest or the abdomen. And that was the bulk of what we were seeing. But we also saw a lot of burns because of the heat of the blast. And then we saw bullet injuries. So we saw a lot of sniper injuries, but the children seemed to be specifically hit by quadcopters, which are drones that have firepower capability. And lots of them were sort of shot in the back, in the head, in the upper torso.
These are the intentional targeting of children? I mean, if it's the head and torso and back? And they're quadcopters, so they're following.
So they're operated by somebody that's watching what they're doing. So I assume that they are targeting children. What we saw was that the bulk of the children were between the age of 5 and probably 15. And when we were with MSF, the theory was that all of the children under 5 were of an age where their parents would pick them up and run with them. And obviously anyone 15 and older is quite agile on their feet and can run away. But that tranche of children between 5 and 15 are often sort of, confused by what's going on, are not the quickest to get up. And so that was, I think, why we saw so many injuries in that age group.
And the trauma that these children must face, it's been said of Gaza that there's no post-traumatic stress disorder because there's no post. Did you experience this? Were you able to spend time in some cases with these children?
There definitely were children that have huge psychological issues. We had a 7-year-old called Mohammed who had been in a blast injury that had brought the house down that he was in, and he was with his father. And in the blast, his father had died, and his mother spoke beautiful English. And she said to me, he just won't speak to me, he won't look at you, he doesn't want to engage with any of the doctors, he just wants to see his father. It was quite a difficult problem because I was watching him not recover from an injury that he should recover from, in that we had amputated his leg and we'd closed it and we'd grafted it, and we had closed all the wounds on his other leg, but the wounds just didn't heal. He wasn't eating, he kept getting infections, he just wasn't progressing, and that totally is due to his mental state. And
we know, of course, now that Gaza has the largest cohort of child amputees in the world. You said that doctors in Gaza are journalists now. I mean, they're killing the journalists, and so it's doctors like yourself who are telling us what's happened. But of course, we know that over 1,000 healthcare workers have also been killed by Israel. Doctors, paramedics, healthcare workers have also been abducted, detained, tortured. Were there doctors who you spent time with in Gaza who moved you particularly, who you will always keep with you?
Lots and lots. When I was at Nasser in August, I worked with an anaesthetist who told me that he had been taken from Shifa and held in an Israeli prison for 43 days, where his hands were tied behind his back and he was blindfolded. He lost 10 kilos in weight, and he said he was beaten every day and then released. And I remember looking at him and thinking, I can't believe that you're back at NASA working. And I think there is this massive feeling of responsibility of the healthcare teams in Gaza to continue coming to work in some, terrible circumstances. Fadi, who was one of my theatre nurses, had come back after 6 weeks off, and his 10-year-old son had been killed in a blast. And one of my other colleagues showed me footage of Fadi running to pick his son up dead off the floor and carrying him out of the sort of area. He had 3 children, 2 girls and a 10-year-old boy. And you just, what do I say to him when he comes back to work? But then everybody that you speak to has lost a sibling, a mother, a father. I mean, obviously the ones that have lost children, you feel more for, because you don't expect to lose your children. But I don't think I met anyone that was unscathed by this.
And in the time that you were there in these hospitals, were there quiet moments? Was there light moments between the doctors?
Yes, yeah, there were. I mean, I think medicine is like that. You have to sort of make the best of what you have, and we certainly had a lot of interesting sort of scrap heap challenge moments when we ran out of stuff that we had to improvise for. And obviously you're all in the same situation together, and they are so grateful that you've come to help them, that there is this sort of, lovely bond between you. So there's a lot of camaraderie.
You said that you went twice, and the first time your mandate was to bring as many supplies in.
Yeah.
The second time you went back to Gaza, did you have a different experience?
Well, the first time we went in, we travelled via Cairo through the Sinai Desert and crossed at Rafah. And we were in the UN convoy, and there was no restriction really on what you could take. You could take whatever you could get into your minibus. So we managed to take 25 suitcases with us in the march full of medical equipment. And obviously we had colleagues inside who told us what they were short of. So it was almost, a perfect sort of scenario for us, in that we turned up with everything that they needed and extra hands. In August, we travelled through Israel, and we crossed at Kerem Shalom, which is controlled by COGAT, who are the Commission for Activities in the Territories, so basically Israel. And they had restricted lots of things, including the number of people that could enter. So in March, we were in a convoy of 19 vans with major NGOs and minor charities. There were so many doctors and nurses. In August, Graham and I were the only 2 surgeons on the coach. There were only 20 seats on the coach. Only 5 of them went to emergency medical teams. All of us could only take 1 bag in, and it had to weigh 23 kilos. And we were told that we had to take our own food for a month.
In your bag?
Yes.
Plus your supplies?
Yes.
And did you have to bring your own water as well?
You had to take your own water for 3 days. That was the advice.
So what medical equipment could you take?
Well, I packed a very small kit. I think from the March trip I knew the surgery I needed to do. I had a friend who had left NASA who told me that, what kit they didn't have. My theatre sister at Thomas's packed me a very small set of instruments, and I went in with a few disposable bits and pieces, and yeah, we got by.
We're going to turn to the audience in a second, but I just want to ask, would you go back?
Yes. I think when you go and you know that you're making a difference, it's very hard not to go back. And the only thing that stops me going back is my family, and particularly my other half, Philip. And I know how difficult it is for Philip when I go. And that's the only reason that I'm ever reticent about going back, is I need to make sure that he's comfortable. If I can sort of get him round, we are looking at going back in February.
If you've got a question for Victoria, please put your hand up. We've got one over there.
I am constantly shocked about how people in the UK and just the West in general are not unanimously outraged about what's going on. So I was wondering, what would you like to see journalists do to combat what you say, the unengaged population? How do we make them see, and how do we make them care?
I'm not 100% convinced that they're unengaged and they don't care. More and more I think that the government doesn't speak for the majority of the population. Everybody I know feels the same as I do, including my Jewish friends. So I don't know where this is coming from, that nobody, gives a damn about Palestine and what's happening in Gaza. I think that is coming at a higher level, and I think we need to continue demonstrating and making it known that we're not supporting what the government are doing with regard to this war.
I'll just take the lady in the back.
Do you think there's a real disconnect between what's happening on the ground and what we're seeing here? And how does that make you feel if you do think that exists?
In the media and in the general, yeah.
I do think there's a real disconnect. I don't think that we are seeing exactly what's going on over there. I think a lot of the younger generation think that it's fine, that you're getting the feed that you need from the Palestinians who are putting it on Instagram and TikTok, but those platforms are not designed to deliver news. They're designed to keep you on them, to sell products and adverts. So your feed may contain some footage from Palestinians, but that's not the majority of feed. Lots of other people are still getting memes of kittens and puppies. So you can't consider that to be a news outlet for the masses. And that's what I've noticed. It's the same people that are approaching me to talk to university students, to talk to Aljezeera. And there's a tranche that just isn't interested in what's happening. And it's those people that I think we need to engage, because I think if they could see what was going on, they would change their opinions of the situation.
We've got a question over here.
I work for War Child, and we provide trauma counselling and child protection services in Gaza. And what's changed more recently for us is our teams now say that they see signs of acute and complex trauma on every child that they see, that they meet and encounter. The humanitarian community's never had to respond to acute trauma at a population level before. So what do you feel would be needed from the international community to respond to the longer-term mental health impacts in Gaza?
I think we are going to have to look very hard at mental health support. I don't know how many of the NGOs prioritise mental health in their medical teams now, but it's going to be needed once we can get back in.
Is it even manageable to do that at a population level?
I think it is manageable. Catherine, who worked with us, who was from Norway, was seeing every child that we operated on, and she had a team of local Palestinian psychotherapists. What you need to remember is everybody thinks that Gaza was this sort of, whole of a place where it was all full of refugees that barely spoke English. It's not, and it's never been like that. They're hugely well educated. All of the women have professions. There's lots of physiotherapists that were Palestinian, loads of occupational therapists, lots of psychotherapists, and they had all come back to work and were working. So they have a huge number of their own teams that will continue. And they've even restarted training their medical students. So when we went in March, the medical students had obviously been, the medical schools had been destroyed in the first wave. But in September they reopened, and they continued to do their medical school exams. And 3 of our students are sitting their final exams now.
Extraordinary. We've got a question over here.
So after the missions in Gaza, how did it affect your life after when you came back to the UK?
A lot of people said, did I suffer sort of post-traumatic stress or, you know, how was it with what I've seen. I have to remember that every day when I go to work at King's, I see, you know, small children that have run out in front of a car whose lives are going to change, you know, indefinitely for them and their family. And I also, in the rest of my time, you know, tell people on see people on a fairly regular basis who are going to die from cancer. So I have always had this as part of my life. But the thing that I find really hard to get over is I can never stop cancer, and I can never stop 4-year-olds running in front of cars on Brixton High Road. But if we had a ceasefire tomorrow, I possibly wouldn't have to see another burnt 7-year-old in Gaza. And that's really hard to rationalise.
I can take one more question if someone's going to be very precise.
Yeah, hi, so I'm Lucy, I'm from the UK. I'm a journalism student now, and I used to work for a Palestinian children's charity that worked in Gaza. Yeah, so over the last year, obviously hospitals normally are meant to be a place of safety, where people go to be safe. And over the last year, obviously, we've seen the opposite, instances where hospitals have been targeted. How concerned were you of this fear while you were there, or were you just so busy constantly dealing with cases that it wasn't even in your mind at the time?
I think in the March it wasn't really in my mind. When we got to the Rafah crossing, we had our journey deconflicted with the IDF, and then I was at the hospital, and I don't think I really thought too much about my safety. In August, we were partnered with MSF, and they take security very seriously. They had 2 of their vehicles targeted, and that never made the news because the people that were killed were Palestinian medics. So they had their fingers burnt, and they were really conscientious, and every night we had to do a security briefing with them where we would go through a map of the territory, what our escape route would be, where the car would be, who was driving. And every night there would be a conversation that went, I'm not sure whether you'll be able to go to the hospital tomorrow. And at the time, I just remember being infuriated by them, that they weren't, you know, letting us just get on with work. But now that I'm back and I look at how on top of it they were, I think, you know, I'm very grateful I was with them. They took security very seriously.
This might be an impossible question, but do you have a profound memory from your time in Gaza that will always stay with you?
I had a group of medical students that I inherited from the European Gaza Hospital, and there were 8 of them. It was only due to them that I got through the volume of work that I got through. I became very fond of them, and when I knew I was going back in August, on our group chat, I said, you know, this is where I'm going to be. And we decided that I would take some time off on a Sunday and have breakfast together. And on the Saturday morning, Abdul Rahman died. His house got bombed in a single fire attack, and he was killed with his aunt and his cousin, and he was 21, and he was a 3rd-year medical student. The following day, obviously, you know, nobody turned up. Everybody was really depressed, and it was really difficult. But then on the Monday, they all came, and we sat in the garden, and we sort of talked about, you know, what was happening with medical schools, and, you know, how Abdul Rahman's parents were. And then Abdul Rahman's sister contacted me, and she said to me, you really inspired him. You know, thank you very much, don't forget him.
Thank you so much, Victoria, for everything you've done and you do, and that you will do in the future.